It's not easy to be a game developer. It seems easy, but it isn't. Let me give you a few examples. In 2003, three guys were selling their own stuff to keep their game company alive. Consoles, furniture, basically anything that could become cash before the company ran out of it. Their first game, Uplink, had been a critical success, but their publisher had stopped paying them royalties. They just stopped paying. So you basically make something people like. People buy it, your game goes well, and somehow you're still selling your furniture. This shows something about indie development that is very easy to forget when you are looking from the outside. Making a good game and running a financially healthy studio are two completely different skills. Sometimes they barely touch each other. So here you have an indie studio that is making something genuinely good, the kind of good that gets awards. And they are still dealing with the very boring problem of, can we afford to keep existing? Uplink was followed by other games like Darwinia and Defcon, a strategy game about nuclear war, and then Introversion, the game studio, started working on something called Subversion. And wait, because this is where the story gets painful. They worked on Subversion for around 6 years. 6 years, that is not a prototype anymore, that is a large part of your adult life. They built systems, they made concepts, they changed things, they tried to figure out what the game actually was. And eventually they cancelled it. Then Chris Delay, Introversion's lead designer, went on holiday to San Francisco. He visited Alcatraz, and while he was there, he was thinking about what was wrong with the prison breaking concept in Subversion. The idea that eventually came to him was almost the exact opposite. Instead of escaping the prison, what if you built it? What if you were the person running the prison? That became Prison Architect, and Prison Architect changed everything for Introversion. By July 2016, the game had sold 2 million copies and generated $25 million in revenue. It also won the BAFTA for Persistent Game in 2016. For the first time in the studio's history, they had real financial safety. But money solved one problem, and then it created another. Mark Morris, one of the Introversion's founders, later explained that having no financial pressure was not necessarily good for creativity, because there were no longer the same constraints forcing the team to make decisions. I understand this one probably more than I would like to. When you are making a game and you know you have 6 months of money left, suddenly every idea has a price. You are forced to answer those questions. Introversion's next game was Scanner Sombre. It came out in 2017 and it sold about 6,000 copies on Steam during its first 2 months. Chris Delay later described it as having bombed in a big way. 6,000 after a game that had sold 2 million copies. Obviously, the games are different. Obviously, the audience was different. But that's exactly the problem. There is no little machine inside your studio that turns one successful game into another successful game. You don't unlock the financially safe forever achievement. After Scanner Sombre, Introversion spent years trying things, abandoning things, and struggling to decide what should come next. Morris described some of those projects as ending up in dark, closed-off alleyways. And in January 2019, Introversion sold the Prison Architect franchise, including the IP and publishing rights to Paradox Interactive for an undisclosed amount. So this sounds like the part where I tell you they finally made it. But this story doesn't have a perfect ending, because that's what development usually feels like. You don't get the final scene where everyone stands outside the studio, holding champagne, while the credits roll. You just make another game, then another, and you check the bank account again. I kind of feel that you're not satisfied with just one story, so here's another one, maybe even more uncomfortable. Stoic was founded by 3 former BioWare developers, Alex Thomas, Arnie Jorgensen, and John Watson, who left the company to make the Banner Saga. They planned to fund the game themselves. The original idea was deliberately small. They expected roughly 1 year of development based on their personal savings. Then they launched a Kickstarter. Their goal was $100,000. They raised more than $700,000, 7 times the original goal. At that point, you might think the financial problem is over. It wasn't. this extra money allowed Stoic to expand the game. The problem was that money does not magically turn into development time. If you have more money, you can make a bigger game. But a bigger game takes longer. And if you make the game bigger while you are already developing it, the budget starts behaving like a hole in the floor. Arne Jorgensen later explained that the team had originally planned for a 1-year development cycle, but the project grew and took roughly twice as long. They were still living from their personal savings. Jorgensen said he depleted his bank account, maxed out 2 credit cards, and borrowed money from his father. The Banner Saga eventually released in January 2014 and became both a critical and commercial success. Stoic then made a decision. They did not go back to Kickstarter for the Banner Saga 2. They used their own money. They also stepped away from their community during development, something John Watson later described as a mistake. And again, the money started running out. Watson said the team began crunching as the funds became tight during development. Then Banner Saga 2 launched in April 2016. And according to Stoic's own later reflections, in its first few months on Steam, it sold around 1/3 as many copies as the first game has sold over the same period. Watson believed their lack of community engagement played a major role. Their publishing partner believed the bigger problem was competition. So what killed the sequel? Bad marketing? Less community attention? A much more crowded Steam? Probably some combination of all of it. The problem isn't just that there are thousands of great games competing with yours. Yeah, your game has to exist inside that pile. And this changes the economics of making a game. Because development is something you can control. You don't control whether a giant publisher announces something that completely dominates the news cycle 2 days before your launch. You don't even control how people describe your game. And that's why a game can be profitable and still not make the studio feel safe. And then there is another layer. The rules can change. Unity gave indie developers a particularly painful example of this in 2023. This is why I don't really like the way indie success stories are usually told. We love the moment where the game explodes. You know, like the big titles, 1 million copies. Everyone celebrates, and okay, they should. That's incredible. But this doesn't show the 2 years before it. It doesn't show the months when nobody cared. It doesn't show the developer wondering if they should get a second job. It doesn't show the publisher negotiation. The point is, success is not the opposite of struggle. Sometimes success is just the thing that allows you to keep struggling for longer. There is a quote from Introversion's Mark Morris that I keep thinking about. You cannot really control how many units you sell, but you can control how long it takes you to get there and how much it costs. That is probably the least exciting piece of advice in game development. It is also probably one of the most important. Remember to subscribe, and thanks for watching.